Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Fahrbach. Now, we are witnessing one of the worst forms of foreign interference. Vice President J.D. Vance declared in Budapest, pointing to the EU while praising Viktor Orbán's leadership on energy security, which focuses on Russian oil and gas imports. Now, the vice president's visit, just days before Hungary's parliamentary election, highlights the unusual alignment of Trump allies with Orbán amid allegations of Russian influence. We speak now with Jakub Jaraczewski, research coordinator, Democracy Reporting International. Good to have you with us again on TVP World.
Good morning, and thank you for having me once again.
So let me begin with another quote here. I mean, J.D. Vance was full of them, full of praise for Viktor Orbán. Another one here I want to start with, calling Orbán the single most profound leader in Europe on the question of energy security, independence. He should have been followed as a shining example. I mean, what do we make of that, the vice president saying this? Is it a surprise? What kind of impact does this have in all this mix?
So, to me, this kind of fits in the pattern of the Trump administration's supporting Viktor Orbán and praising his policies across the board, from his conservative stance on cultural issues through his assertiveness toward the European Union to energy. Of course, as you mentioned, one can ask whether the energy policy of Hungary, which has been heavily dependent on oil and gas imports from Russia and have been exposed weaknesses in the wake of the Druzhba situation pipeline in Ukraine, has been the best choice. But to me, it fits into the bigger pattern of simultaneously the Trump administration trying to warm up ties in Russia and thus being willing to support and praise those countries that are cooperating with Russia on energy and other issues.
Mm-hmm. And also he went further and first he said he doesn't want to tell the Hungarians who to vote for, but at the same time he was very much then telling, look, we got to get this guy reelected, pointing to Orbán, also accusing the European Union of, I'm quoting here, disgraceful interference. Again, your reaction to that, I mean, from a man who himself is interfering.
So, to me, a vice president of the United States visiting a country days ahead of the elections and endorsing one candidate, that is pretty much a textbook of what political interference in elections is. And of course, one could ask a question, what would happen if, say, the French president Emmanuel Macron would arrive in the United States days before the presidential elections and would endorse one candidate, and how would Vice President Vance and his allies react? And I think that they would react with outrage and call this unacceptable. And if we are looking here for some kind of consistency or for some kind of a clear standard, I don't think we will find any, because what we've seen from Trump administration over and over again is that the standards and their applications change depending on the context and the needs. We're talking about the peace Nobel Prize and establishing the board peace in one place, and on the other hand, we're attacking Iran and we are threatening Cuba. So this is fitting into this pattern, and this pattern is whatever is currently needed is the standard that's being applied. And definitely we can expect that if anybody tried to do the same towards the United States, there would be significant outrage from the Republican circles.
Mm-hmm. And Jakub, you mentioned this is a certain pattern that we've seen emerge, but it just seems as more and more is emerging so close to that election. Also, I think Bloomberg broke this, saying that there was a phone call, I think back in October, between Orbán and Putin, saying Orbán basically saying he's at the disposal of Putin. So again, reaction there, but also what kind of impact does this ultimately have on the mood and on the vote coming up in a few days?
So Viktor Orbán's policy towards both Trump administration and Putin is, again, I think, a clear pattern that his choice is to cozy up to big powers and to try to get their backing in order to score domestic victory. And very much, again, inconsistently highlighting the Hungary as the middle power and as playing up to the sentiment of Greater Hungary on the one hand, but on the other hand, banking and support of bigger countries and their backing in the election round. So this is, I think, another pattern which fits. And I think that the impact of this, again, is going to be primarily a reinforcement of the Fidesz voters in their belief that Viktor Orbán is talking with the big people, that he is on a phone call with the leader of a great, powerful nuclear country, and what actually is the content of that call, and that it shows clearly that Viktor Orbán has been quite desperately trying to seek support from Vladimir Putin. That is besides. I don't think this is going to influence much the voters of the opposition parties. Both TISA and Micha Zang voters are rather clearly disconnected from Viktor Orbán's narrative and his foreign policy. But I think definitely this will resonate with at least some of Orbán's voters who are just happy that their leader is shaking hands with the big people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also speaking of those big people, those big leaders, just give us briefly, I mean, we covered a bit why the U.S. is involved, but just give us your sense really briefly for our audience why the United States consistently is supporting Orbán in such a way, very publicly, and also Russia. But Russia, is it just because it is selling oil and gas, or is it something more? Just give us your take why both of these powers are so much behind Viktor Orbán.
I think that both for President Trump's administration and for Vladimir Putin, having an EU member state that is friendly to them and is willing to go far in order to secure their support is a very attractive proposition. After all, this in a way means that there is an allied country which would be willing to share information, as we already know from the previously discussed calls between the Hungarian foreign minister and his Russian counterpart, and as well in order perhaps to have their backing in supporting American interests inside of the European Union at the various EU fora. So, practically speaking, from the kind of power politics perspective, it is advantageous for both the United States and for Russia to have an ally within the European Union, an ally which is less of an equal partner and more of dependent on their backing support and on their interventions like the ones now in order to secure their political future.
Mm-hmm. And then also, I just want to get your sense as well. I mean, the main opposition, the Peter Magyar, who in some of those polls is very much still ahead, up to about 10 percentage points. Looking at his responses, well, he said, I believe, also out of all of this, these elections aren't decided by Brussels or by Washington. What's his stance to all of this, and what should his approach be if we have the vice president so much pushing his opposite?
So I believe that Peter Magyar, on the one hand, tries to distance himself from this kind of politics that Viktor Orbán is carrying out and wants to highlight that this kind of interference is not welcome. But also, Magyar has been consistently trying to ensure that his message also lands with Viktor Orbán's voters, the current or former ones. And so plays up the angle of Hungary under his prospective leadership being resistant to interference, be it from anybody, from the United States or from the European Union, and kind of trying to make sure that he is not seen as a strongly pro-EU voter, and that he will be not exposing himself to an attack from Orbán and his allies over the European Union. And this has been consistent with the fact that Peter Magyar has been somewhat downplaying the EU angle of the story. Even in the images you're showing right now, there are scarcely few EU flags during the rallies of Peter Magyar, and he is quite consistently trying to show that he is not this uncritically pro-Brussels, pro-EU politician, and that if he will be elected, he will be assertive and he was going to represent Hungarian interest.
Mm-hmm. All right, so just one final sentence on this. Will this visit by J.D. Vance help or hinder Viktor Orbán in the next few days?
Difficult to say. I would say that perhaps the most important people to watch in the coming days are the swing voters, the undecided ones, who are going to react to the most recent developments. And developments such as J.D. Vance is definitely going to be one of them. And Some of people will look at this and they will probably say that this is showing that Viktor Orbán is playing in the club with the big boys and he is part of a much more important, greater coalition, so perhaps this is a reason to vote for him. But there might be voters who will say that they are not open to this kind of interference and that this means that they want to have a leader who will not welcome such visits. So it's difficult to say, really, and very much can change in the last few days as we head into the vote on Sunday.
Exactly right, and those are going to be days closely watched as that Sunday election nears in Hungary. Look, thanks so much for all that. Really pleasure having you, Jakub Jaraczewski, there from Democracy Reporting International.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay right here for more news and commentary on TVP World. Goodbye.